Oh, it's Friday, guys, right before Selection Sunday. It's your host, Poke, with the Poke Bowl Show. And this week, we have one of my final bracketologies, probably my last bracketology till Selection Sunday. So here it is. We're going to go a little go over it a little bit and kind of fill it out and just talk about what I'm thinking at this particular time. I can't wait for Sunday. It's going to be really fun. We're going to make sure to film the Selection Sunday show and show our reaction. So keep an eye on that on Sunday. But let's go into the bubble picture. So the last four byes, we got TCU, Michigan State, St. John's, and Oklahoma. All four of those teams are likely just safe altogether. They aren't going to get their bid stolen or lose out on their bid, in my opinion. I think those four are very safe. Next four out, as you can see, Villanova, K-State, Wake Forest, and Iowa. Those teams, I think, are out. The real bubble picture is what we see in the last four in and first four out. So first four out, we got Indiana State as the first team out. They have no way of playing into the tournament though, so they need either Virginia to fall, most likely to NC State, or and probably hope that there's no more bid stealers outside of the A10. You got Texas A&M. If they beat Kentucky today, they are in a decent position. The only thing I'll say about A&M though is they were kind of a bit of a loser yesterday. Yes, they beat Ole Miss, which is a nice quality win, but also Memphis lost. So that loss earlier in the year has turned into a quad three loss. So that's five quad three losses up to this point for A&M, which kind of hurts their resume, especially this late in the season. You got Pitt. If they beat UNC today, they're in a good spot. And then you got Providence. And if they beat Marquette, they're in a pretty decent spot. So Pitt and Providence, I think, are the two teams that really can play themselves into the tournament. Indiana State really needs some help, even though I have them as a first team out. Seton Hall is the best team in the last four in, but bad thing with Seton Hall is they lost yesterday to St. John. So if um they have no way of moving up. They are just right there, or teams are going to pass them, which is going to be very scary for the Seton Hall Pirates. Then you got New Mexico, big win yesterday against Boise State. I think that make them very comfortable in the picture. If they beat Colorado State tonight, they're really good. Virginia and Colorado. I think Virginia is in the most iffy position because if they lose to NC State, that's going to be considered a bad loss. Colorado, they play Washington State. It's not going to be a bad loss if they lose to Washington State. So let's go into the actual bracket and let's go into the first four games. You got Virginia versus Colorado. Sorry about that. Okay, Virginia versus Colorado. I'm thinking right now that Colorado wins this one. Haven't been impressed with Virginia up to this point, especially recently. Colorado has looked pretty well. They looked good against Utah, who was in dire need of winning that game to make it. Wagner versus Texas Southern. I'm going to go with Wagner. I know a lot of people are concerned with their depth issues, but that defense was really good, beating a very good Merrimack team in the NEC championship. Seton Hall versus New Mexico. I love both of these teams. I'm going to go with the Lobos, though. I'm riding high with the Lobos this year, so go Lobos. And Montana State versus NC Central. Montana State has gotten hot in the Big Sky tournament. They ended up winning the Big Sky. I believe they beat Weber State in the quarters, which was a really good win, and then beat Montana in the championship. So we're gonna go with Montana State. They just made their third NCAA tournament appearance in a row. So congratulations to the Bobcats. So we're going to go into the Midwest region first. My number one overall seed is Purdue, and they're playing Wagner. And I don't think that Purdue's going to lose to another NEC team. Last year, they lost to Fairleigh Dickinson, who ended up being the next bid, but I don't see Wagner beating Purdue. So we're gonna go with Purdue right there. Texas versus Colorado State. Colorado State had a really impressive win yesterday, but I'm still not 100% sold on them. We're gonna go with Texas here, although not really sold on either team really. Texas Tech versus Grand Canyon. Who's going to win this one? It's going to be close, but Texas Tech is starting to heat up. I believe they beat Baylor last Saturday, which was a big win. And then they beat BYU in the quarters yesterday in the Big 12 tournament. So we're going to go with Texas Tech. I've been really impressed with them the last couple games. Auburn versus Charleston. This was a matchup, I think, in the 2018 March Madness tournament. But that was with Earl Grant as the coach, who is a Boston College coach. Charleston has looking really good with Pat Kelsey as the head coach. I think last year I was really high on them, but the issue was they were getting hyped up by a lot of people. This year, they're kind of going under the radar. So I think that makes them even more dangerous. So we're going to go with the 13-4 upset with Charleston over Auburn. I know I had Auburn in the Final Four a couple weeks ago in my bracketology, but we're going with the upset here today. Nevada versus Colorado. This is going to be an interesting one. Colorado, big win yesterday, which made them fairly comfortable in the field, I think. But I'm going to go with Nevada. I'm really big fan of Blackshear, Davison, Lucas. I just think that team is really good. We're going with Nevada. Baylor versus Morehead State. I'm going to go with Baylor here. I think their guard play is just way too good. And Scott Drew is one of the best coaches in the country. St. Mary's versus OU. I'm not a big fan of OU. I know I'm an Oklahoma State grad, so I'm never really going to say positive things about OU. But I'm just not really sold on them this year. St. Mary's, on the other hand, is just a very high floor team. They're just very solid. We're going to go with the Gales here. Marquette versus Western Kentucky. Huge win yesterday versus Villanova, ended their bubble hopes, and a very controversial ending to regulation. I was kind of surprised they overturned that call when the buzzer beater. But we're going with Marquette, even though Tyler Kolek is still out. I'm hopeful that he'll be back. Purdue, Texas. Keep it simple. I'm not sold on Texas, so we're gonna go with Purdue here. Texas Tech versus Charleston. I am gonna go with Texas Tech here. I really want to pick Charleston. I'm a big fan of Pat Kelsey. That's who I want Oklahoma State to hire as their head coach. So hopefully we can get Pat Kelsey, but I don't think he beats the Big 12 rival in Texas Tech if he was to be Oklahoma State's next head coach. Nevada versus Baylor. I'm going to go with Baylor here. I'm just really high with Scott Drew, really high on their guard play. I'm going to go with Baylor. St. Mary's versus Marquette. This is an interesting one. It depends on Tyler Kolek. If Tyler Kolek is back, I'm probably going to lean towards Marquette. If he isn't back, I'm going to probably go with St. Mary's. I'm kind of 50-50 if he's back or not. Just for the sake of, let's keep it upset oriented excitement, we're going to go with St. Mary's Gills. Purdue versus Texas Tech. I'm going to go with Texas Tech actually here. I just think they're red hot right now, and they're going to be playing the Baylor Bears, which was a matchup just last Saturday. So really exciting Elite Eight matchup, two Big 12 teams. And we're going to go with Baylor Bears as the Final Four team out of the Midwest region. So going up to the top right region, we got the South region. And if you notice, I had UConn as the number 2 overall seed the last couple bracketologies, but this time we're going to go with Houston. I just think They're really playing some great basketball. They're dominating one, arguably the best conference in all of basketball in the Big 12. So what you got Houston as the number 2 overall seed. And I got them beating Montana State. Montana State, great run, like I said earlier, but Houston's just going to be too much. Northwestern versus Mississippi State. Mississippi State just had a big win against Tennessee, which I definitely based this bracketology off of those results. That's the last thing that's happened. Mississippi State beating Texas or Tennessee. So that's, if you have some disagreements with the bracketologies, just know that it was based on right after that game. No other games after that are based on this bracketology. So we're going to go with Mississippi State, just looking really good. Chris James, excellent coach. San Diego State versus James Madison. San Diego State starting to struggle, so we're going to go with James Madison. Illinois versus Vermont, another really good team, good game. I'm going with Illinois. I think Terrence Shannon is just going to be too much for Vermont. Utah State versus Princeton, another great game. Danny Sprinkle is going to be a top coaching candidate for a lot of these schools. Just a great overall team. Princeton, really great as well. We're going to go with Princeton as an upset, though. Creighton versus Long Beach State. So I have Long Beach State still winning the Big West. I know UC Irvine is probably the favorite up to this point with their elite defense, but I got Long Beach State winning today against UC Irvine in the semis and then winning the championship. But in this matchup, we're going to go with Creighton. I just think they're just going to be too much for Long Beach State. Gonzaga versus TCU. I'm a big fan of TCU this year, but I think this is the time Gonzaga just becomes too much. This was actually a matchup last year's tourney in the round of 32, which was a really great game between Drew Timme and Gonzaga and Mike Miles and TCU. But fortunately, neither team has those two studs anymore. But today, we're going to go with Gonzaga. Tennessee versus Quinnipiac. Tennessee's starting to slow down a little bit. So that's kind of concerning me. But in this matchup, it's no concern at all. We're going with Tennessee and the Bulls. Houston versus Mississippi State. I just think Houston's defense is too much. Illinois versus James Madison. We're going to go with Illinois here. Princeton versus Creighton. A really good matchup. And if I remember right, this was a Sweet 16 matchup last year when Creighton was a 6 seed and Princeton made that incredible run as a 15 seed. This year, it's a 3 versus 11, but we're going to go with the upset here with Princeton. We got Gonzaga versus Tennessee. Gonzaga's looked good the past couple months, but we're going to go with Tennessee here. Houston versus Illinois. We're going to go with Houston Cougars right here. Princeton versus Tennessee. I'm going to go with Tennessee still. I know they're slowing down a little bit, which concerns me, but we're going with Tennessee. And for a spot in the Final Four, Houston versus Tennessee. And I know that the last couple bracketologies, I've had Tennessee winning. And I know they've kind of slowed down the last week or so. But I'm still going with Tennessee here. I just got that gut feeling that they'll still make a run. And we'll see if they prove me wrong or not. But we're going with Tennessee as the Final Four team out of that region. East region right here. UConn versus Stetson. Stetson, incredible run in the A7 tournament. But it's just not going to be enough to beat UConn. Dayton versus FAU. I'm going to go with FAU. Yes, they've kind of looked weaker than last year so far this year, but I think that the experience is going to be too much. And Dayton, I think, has some severe depth issues, and that cost him in the A10 tournament yesterday. We're going with FAU. BYU versus South Florida. I'm going to go with South Florida here. Mind you, they don't win the American. They aren't going to make the tournament. But I think they're going to win the American, and I think they're going to be a 12 seed and upset BYU here. Alabama versus Samford. I'm going with the upset here. I'm not a big fan of Alabama. Samford has looked really good, elite offense, and we're going to see that South Florida versus Samford game, which is really exciting stuff in the round of 32. Wisconsin versus Drake, another upset. This seems like the upset region up to this point. We got Drake winning this one. Duke versus Akron. I just think Duke is going to be too much. I'm not a big fan of Duke this year, but I just don't think Akron's that good out of the MAC. Washington State versus St. John's. St. John's is heating up, guys. I think y'all better watch out for the Johnnies. We're going with the upset here with St. John's over Washington State. We got Iowa State versus Colgate. Don't think Colgate's that good this year. It was a very weak Patriot League. We're going to go with Iowa State Cyclones here. UConn versus Florida Atlantic. We're going with UConn here. South Florida versus Samford. We're going with South Florida. My co-host, Dan Spielvogel, aka Bull, would be very happy if I picked South Florida to go to the Sweet 16. So that's what we're going to do. Drake versus Duke. I'm going with the upset here. I'm going with Drake here. DeVries, great coach and great player. His son is an incredible player. Indiana State lost to Drake in the NBC. So that was really impressive job by Drake. So we're going with Drake over Duke here. St. John's versus Iowa State. I'm going with Iowa State. I just think they're a little too much for St. John's. UConn versus South Florida. I'm going with the favorite here, UConn. Just too much for South Florida. Drake versus Iowa State. We are going with Iowa State. And yes, we got a little chalky at the end, but with all the upsets in the early rounds in this region, it just happened to be. UConn versus Iowa State. I am going to go with the 1 seed UConn. I'm a big fan of Iowa State this year, but I just think UConn's going to be too much in that Elite Eight matchup. Now for the final region, we got the West region. North Carolina gets that final number 1 seed playing Longwood, who had a really good run in the Big South tournament, beating High Point and then demolishing UNC Asheville. Impressive stuff by Longwood, but North Carolina is going to be too much for them. We got Boise State versus Nebraska, and I'm going to go with Boise State here. I get that they lost to New Mexico yesterday, but New Mexico's a great team. Boise State, I'm going to say, keep an eye out for Max Rice. Yes, he's not Boise State's best player necessarily, but he's an X factor. If he is cold, Boise State's going to lose. But if he shoots lights out like he's done several times this year, Boise State might go on a run, guys. So Boise State's going to beat Nebraska. South Carolina versus McNeese. I'm going with the Gamecocks. South Carolina just finds a way to win. And McNeese, I'm not really impressed with him. Yes, their record is looking great and all, and it's going to be a popular upset pick among many, but I'm not really impressed with McNeese. The Southland Conference is one of the weakest conferences in college basketball. We're going with South Carolina there. Kansas versus St. Bonaventure. This is my A10 champion right now, St. Bonaventure. I think Kansas is going to be too much, though. Clemson versus New Mexico. I'll just say whoever wins that playing game between Seton Hall and New Mexico is going to win this matchup. In this case, we got New Mexico, so let's just move them in forward. Kentucky versus Oakland. Going to go with Kentucky here. They're starting to heat up. Really exciting team. Arguably the most talented team in the country. Florida versus Michigan State. I'm going to go with Florida here. Michigan State, goes on runs in the tournament when they're seeded around this point, but I'm going to go with Florida, although they kind of slowed down the last week or so. I think they're going to turn it back on in the tournament. Arizona versus South Dakota State. Going to go with Arizona here. We got North Carolina versus Boise. I'm going with UNC right here. South Carolina versus Kansas. Going to go with the Gamecocks. And we have a great Sweet 16 matchup between the two Carolinas in North Carolina and South Carolina, which would be a fantastic matchup. We got New Mexico versus Kentucky. This game is really intriguing. I think Kentucky's capable of making a Final Four run, possibly winning it all. But I think New Mexico is my Cinderella team this year. We're going with New Mexico Lobos right here. We need a playing team to make a run, and that's going to be the Lobos this year. Florida versus Arizona. Going with the upset here with Florida. Like I said, I think they're going to turn it back on once the tournament hits. North Carolina versus South Carolina. I'm going with North Carolina. Here, I would love if South Carolina wins it, but we're going with UNC. New Mexico versus Florida. I'm going with the Lobos here with New Mexico. And we got this matchup for a spot in the Final Four. North Carolina versus New Mexico. Drum roll. We're going to New Mexico. I think the Lobos are going to win this matchup. I think North Carolina is a great team, but I want that Cinderella story, and that is going to be New Mexico this year. Baylor versus New Mexico. I wish I could go with New Mexico here, but we're going with Baylor here. Tennessee versus UConn. I'm still hopeful for Tennessee, so we're going with them over UConn. And for the national championship, we got Baylor and Tennessee. Who is going to win? I think everyone already knows I'm going to go with the team I've been going with the past couple months, and that is the Tennessee Bulls. I think that they're going to turn it back on once the tournament hits. Remember, Baylor 2021 was starting to look a little weaker this time of the year, and then they absolutely dominated March Madness. I think Tennessee could be similar. We're going to go with Tennessee as your national champions, and can't wait for Selection Sunday, guys. That's going to be this Sunday, which is going to be so epic. Make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and keep an eye out for our videos in the future. We have that Selection Sunday reaction show gonna come out on Sunday, hopefully, and maybe Bull, aka Dan, aka Bull, will post a video tomorrow. We'll see if he's able to. He's been out of town, so on vacation, so we'll see if he's able to. But we got Tennessee winning the national championship. Have a good one, guys, and I'm out. See ya.